Okay, thank you, everyone. We're excited to have everyone here, and we're excited about Xtreme LA 2016 Virginia Tech. So I want to give a few people, I want to acknowledge a few people, including all the professionals and all the students that have participated. And I think first we want to thank the school, Virginia Tech. So if we can give the school a big round of applause. Thank you so much for having us. It's an inspiring place for me personally. I'm just always so impressed when I come here with the faculty and the students and the energy. So we couldn't be more pleased that we're here. Thank you very much. I also want to acknowledge our two team leaders who've worked very hard and are also two people that I got to learn a lot from last night at dinner. So Paul Kissinger with EDSA, principal. Paul, yeah. And Lisa DePlace with Uma von Sweden. Lisa, principal and CEO. And I would also like to have Terry Clements, chair of Landscape Architecture program here at Virginia Tech. So you don't want to listen to me. All I would like to say is Landscape Forums is so proud to be able to host and put on events of this nature. We believe in the profession. We believe in the value of it, and we hope that when you think about our company, you think about us maybe a little bit differently. So I'm gonna give the microphone over to Terry and get off the stage here.
And then I just hand it to them.
Yep.
Okay. We're getting good at this. I want to also thank all of you for participating. Our guests that have come in from all over the country to work on some problems that we have in Blacksburg, some issues that we have in Blacksburg, but actually they're issues that affect communities all across the country and perhaps globally. And then the students that willingly gave up a couple of days and a couple of long nights in order to work on this. And we're going to be leveraging your good thinking, your hard thinking, and your ideas here, because I think one of the things we want to keep in mind is that landscape architecture needs to exercise its voice. The work that we do is important to places, it's important to communities, not just economically, but socially and culturally. And you're the guys and gals that are going to be responsible for doing that. You really are next leaders. And so we hope that you had a great time doing this and that you got some really good sleep on the planes as you're going back home. But again, thank you. And I'm so excited that you came. I hope you had a grand time. And now I'm really excited to hear what you got to tell us about. And I'm going to hand this over to the leaders, team leaders now.
Thank you. Well, with every presentation, there's going to be a lot of thank yous. And again, we thank you for showing up. We thank Landscape Forums, certainly for putting this on. It's a wonderful program. I know Lisa and I have had a blast doing this. It's very reinvigorating for us to come and work with young students and young professionals and to see that passion and excitement. And as Terry said, you are the next leaders, and we do have a voice as landscape architects. We can make a difference. And so I've enjoyed it quite a bit, and I'm going to let Lisa say a few things.
I just want to extend my gratitude, because I know how hard you all worked. And Paul and I have just been so thrilled, and we're thrilled with Landscape Forums, LAF, Virginia Tech. Thank you so much. This has been great, and it's great for us because we learn so much from you. So we're excited to see. We know you have all put in tremendous work, so we're excited to see. So with that, let's see. Team 1 can introduce the process and the design.
Thank you. I'm Oliver Kiley, the unofficial CEO of Team 1, which means I'm going to say very few words and get off the stage before people throw things at me. Anyway, I was curious. I just wanted to do one quick thing before we get started. We're going to do a quick show of hands things here. So how many people here are students at Virginia Tech in one way or another? All right, good chunk. Design professionals that are in the area or that are coming in from out of town? How many other people are, say, other representatives from Virginia Tech, maybe outside of the design school or the architecture school here? Any? Few? And then just also, we heard there were going to be people from the community here, and this is hopefully going to be near and dear to your heart. So people that are representing the community, residents, businesses, others. Great. Awesome. Okay, well, good to know. So we'll get started. I'll pass this off in a second. Just a little bit, we'll go into some analysis work about the project in a second as we go. Really, though, I just wanted to say, as being a participant in this process, it's been really amazing that this opportunity came together with Virginia Tech and Landscape Forums and the LAF, just to meet other professionals, to meet students, and to sort of get reinvigorated in tackling just kind of a fun project. It's amazing what has happened in really about little over 24 hours worth of work since we really got started here. So hopefully this will be exciting. We'll kind of, the process will be fairly evident, but just to give you a brief kind of synopsis of what we did. Yesterday, bright and early, we hit the ground running. We went out and looked at 2 sites. We'll talk about where those are as we get into this. And then we spent all day yesterday sort of brainstorming, coming up with ideas, coming up with plans, figuring out how we can take all these ideas and package them in a way that makes a lot of sense and that can hopefully have an impact and maybe give you a new way of thinking about your community and some of the opportunities that are here. Okay, so with that, Eduardo.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I'm Eduardo Santamaria with Andropogon, and so for our vision, we are looking at that 13-acre middle school site along Main, call it Middle Hill, and if we think of the word, middle and what that means for urban design and landscape implications, it has a ton of opportunities. It's centralized. You have, it's in the midst of something. It has the opportunity to engage, to multiple things. So I think we take this seriously, and we're very interested in what this could mean. So Middle Hill will be a place that fosters personal growth, social growth, and natural growth by creating an interconnected community and using the hill and the middle as a metaphor for the exciting development that is going to be happening in Blacksburg. And we really see this concept as this gradient or this meshing, weaving, the community of Virginia Tech and Blacksburg, which the way it operates right now, it's very much one thing, but really finding the opportunity of finding out what that actually means. So the proposal really is that hinge of those two communities that are really one. And the question we have for you is, what kind of place do you want Blacksburg to be? I think that's a critical question in thinking the vision and setting up a new model for thinking how development works, how public space works, how people interact. And so the site as it operates right now, it's really a void in the middle. So with these neighborhoods around, it's fenced, not used, and the streets just kind of dead end into it. So it really, it has great opportunity to be activated in that it could actually be, in the middle of Blacksburg. So the center really becomes a place where you cut across, you move through the middle, you engage what's happening, and you really create this engagement of the urban fabric. So how do we do this? We have 3 large, ambitions and 3 ideas to think about. One of them is creating the diversity in demographics, but also in generations. How do we get people, how do we get people of different ages to interact and for both to see what the other one is doing and really have, that's one of the benefits of the community, just having people that are really excited to be here. And of course, I think providing meaningful open spaces. So just having open space or green space isn't good enough. Having usable and meaningful public space where people can, during the seasons, they can engage with their natural environment and they can see what the community is up to. And lastly, really exciting Blacksburg with a slice of an urban experience. I think the bones are there for, and I think the excitement is there where people can, they want to be out, they want to be biking, they want to, have a beer, and really finding these opportunities to make it a really exciting place. All right,
Okay, I'm going to go over some of the analysis for both groups. We kind of jointly did it together. So a really important element in Blacksburg is the buses. It's a communication between Virginia Tech and the town of Blacksburg, especially as a student. There's not a lot of parking on campus. So we mapped the bus stops to make sure these sites have a connection within the town of Blacksburg. And the circles represent a quarter-mile radius, which is about a 5-minute walk. So that's a comfortable walking distance. So zoning within the area, so the green to the left of our site, that's the commercial downtown. So that's your mixed-use shops, restaurants, and small shops, with the top being apartments. Next to that is the campus. And then to the right, that's kind of our site of the Middle Hill, is really the middle gap between the downtown commercial and the rest of the commercial area strip. So the Harold Street neighborhood is mainly residential and more the historic residential with some less use, lower density residential. So we looked at the future land use of what the town sees to the town, and Middle Hill was actually still zoned as civic, even though it said it was going to turn into low density. And Hale Street is very much medium density residential, which is picking up its current population and density. So we looked at parks and open space. This does not show what's on Virginia Tech's campus, because that's technically civic and private. However, to note, the drill field and Henderson Lawn are very important to the Virginia Tech community. The drill field is the center of green space in Virginia Tech, and Henderson Lawn is where there's often events within Virginia Tech. So as you can tell, there's not a lot of big green open spaces. There is the golf course, which you have to pay for, and it only goes to a select group of people. Besides that, there are some small parks throughout the community, but not when really close to our two sites. Another thing to know is right next to the Harold Street, there is the Huckleberry Trail, which is a rail-to-trail program for bikers, pedestrians, that connects us with Christiansburg and to the Jefferson National Forest, which is very popular for students and for the residents in Blacksburg. So, our watersheds in this area. Struvel's Creek runs right underneath Joelfield and Virginia Tech with some other minor watersheds, and all of it goes away. Where the golf course is, up there, that is the high point, and from that point you can see all of Blacksburg if you ever want a good view. And all the water goes away from that. So we are at kind of a higher point where our two sites are. So these are the two locations of our site. Middle Hill, which is really the middle between the downtown and the commercial area, as I said earlier, and Hale Street neighborhood, and it's next to Stadium Woods, which is the only remaining old growth forest in this area. It's also next to Virginia Tech and Lane Stadium, so it has become this important part of the Virginia Tech culture for tailgating and other areas, and a lot of students like to live there because it's so close to classes and campus. So some major circulation is Main Street, which is where all our shops are, and some minor streets off of Main Street are important as students try to skip and residents try to skip Main Street. Some other important things, as I mentioned earlier, the Huckleberry Trail, which is the main pedestrian and bike path in Blacksburg, and some minor streets that kind of help fill the void of getting around Blacksburg. There's the Country Club off to the right, and College Avenue, which goes straight from Virginia Tech to Main Street. So some basic history of Blacksburg. It was first settled by Native Americans. When the Europeans first came here, there was a lot of conflicts between the Europeans and the Native Americans. Then the Black family and settled in Blacksburg, and they laid out the original 16 square grid, which I will get to next. As it developed, Virginia Tech was founded in 1872, and that kind of promoted Blacksburg's growth. However, Blacksburg did not really grow until post-World War II. At the GI Bill, a lot of old World War II people came back, soldiers came back, and they went to Virginia Tech, and that's when our need for housing came through. Also, when the university transitioned from a military school to a public, full public, civilian cadet school with co-ed, saw a big population booth, and then we also created a big population within the town of Blacksburg to support the school. And so the 16 squares was the original 16 squares laid out by the Black family, and it was they divided each square into 4 things to have 4 lots in each of them. And this is really important because this is right next to the middle school site, and this fabric is still here today. So one of our goals was to try to weave through what the existing infrastructure with what is already there.
These are, I'm just going to present from your perspective, these are just a few of the kind of existing condition slides. Oh, I need this, don't I? Just a couple of the existing image slides from kind of the street around the middle school site, sort of looking into that. And one of the things that you'll see in the design is there's this need to be sensitive to what the context is around the site. So to the south, as we looked before, there's lots of residential properties, there's more business along Main Street. So how we interface and be sensitive to those uses is pretty important. And then on the interior of the site, if you've ever been out there, there's some pretty crazy topography. So there's some high points, some low points, and some bowls, and some really steep drop-offs going down to the roadways. So how we respond to that through our design is something that we took a lot of time kind of looking at. All right. Oh, there you are.
As was mentioned, our idea was to try to begin to incorporate the former middle school site into the urban fabric of Blacksburg. And so our overall concept was to start with the highest density along Main Street, where there's already more high density development, and to sort of let that ease back with middle density and then low density development as we get closer to more of these single family residential areas, and to break that up with green space. And we had 2 types of green space we wanted to include. One was the civic green, which feels more like a part of the urban area, like a city park for everyone to enjoy. And then a community green that's kind of speaking more to the neighborhood that's there. So looking at how that kind of schematic could work out onto the site, we really began with that 16 square grid and decided to use the circulation as a structuring force for the rest of the design. So you can see here how we've brought some of these streets all the way through the site, and some of them are just coming to serve residential areas on the end. The white dash lines going through are pedestrian access points, because we really wanted that this area to be accessible to vehicles for people who are living in this area, but also really to connect to the walkable downtown. And another one of our priorities was to have buildings facing both Main Street and Earhart so that they're in conversation with the existing development that's there. And so more specifically, how that's built out is taking that pedestrian line and making a green spine that runs through the site, so that from this point on Main Street, you can you're kind of drawn into the site. And right along the edge, we have some high density mixed use development. We're kind of open to what that could end up being. And it could be transitional over time. Then moving back onto the civic green, we kind of blended the high density and mid density so that the civic green really had an urban presence with some kind of higher story residential facing the park. And then along Earhart and Clay Street, having more two-story residential townhouses on this side to relate to the more neighborhood community, and more potential for live, work, or flexible housing space on Clay Street to continue to speak to the urban fabric on the other side. And then this community green that's going through the site here is kind of relating to the church and school that exists up Palmer Drive. And taking advantage of the topography of the area. There's a way up in that top corner. There's a kind of outflow of a lot of the water from this neighboring area. So we decided to emphasize that in creating a community green that is speaking to the stormwater that exists on site, and kind of creating a kind of more ecologically based and more flexible community green space where families could have their children come play. Maybe there's sort of adventure playground area in there. Maybe there's community gardens that abut this area. And then the low density development beyond, we were looking at kind of more of a cottage court style where the houses are facing kind of more private greens, but it's still a community feeling. So as opposed to getting as low density as the areas around it, keeping it at slightly higher density, more affordable housing in that area. So this gives you some cross sections. This is the Middle Hill Promenade, that's Main Street there, and then going back to the smaller scale residential so that you can get a kind of a feeling of how those different typologies would kind of read in relationship to each other. And then this would be a section along Main Street looking into the site here. So we've got the existing retail and apartments, and then the promenade that pulls you into the rest of the neighborhood, and more retail and apartments kind of anchoring this other end. And so this is a kind of a view of what that might feel like, kind of really allowing the space between the buildings to be like a community space and a green space. And so this is looking kind of at just like what these masses might feel like if you're coming from Miller Street. We thought the connection to the library down Miller Street was really important, what it felt like for you to kind of come down that street. Maybe you've just rented a book and you want to go read it in the park. What it would feel like heading down there. You've got kind of this strong urban feeling of the buildings next to you, but you're going out into a more open space. Yeah, sure.
So I'll continue to talk about the massing study. And so what the model is trying to convey is just in block form what might be the spatial differences along the whole entire site. So what's omitted from here is architectural differences or softscapes or hardscapes, but really just looking at the spaces. So here you can see the strong spine that goes through the middle, as well as how the topography relates is that you have an existing building that's on the corner, and then if you want to go to the next one. So again, the spine, you can see how we phase and that the site is fairly structured on the Main Street side and then loosens up as you go through the civic space and then on through the mid-density and then to the lowest density in the back. You can find opportunities to hide utilities or service sides of the retail or shops on the inner side. Maybe that's parking as you go through the site. Here's Main Street and Earhart, and so with the topography is that if you have a 3-story building that exists, and then you have more of a residential feel on this side as you're approaching downtown. Right now it's a very stark contrast, and that might be stark just because you don't have a feathering effect. And so we're stepping down the buildings from 3 to possibly a 2, but trying to find some opportunities for diversity through there. This is looking from the back of the site where the low density housing is to the front of the site. Downtown would be up in this area, but you can see in the next image is that here's the connection to outside parts, trying to pull connections from the neighboring context through the church and school would be here, and then pulling the stormwater systems through the site and then connecting on the other side. You can see how the grid might tie into various spots as well.
So myself and my colleague Lauren are going to be talking briefly about the housing typology, or in other words, what those building masses can begin to look like and function as places for people to live. So as we mentioned before, the general concept is to go from the higher density to the lower density, and taking what's already existing in the surrounding neighborhoods and bringing that kind of density, that typology, that character into the site. So that in the end you have that retail strength on Main Street, and then going back to more of the cottage home experience in the back end. And all again, working off that central spine, and perhaps in each of those typologies, it might be a simple common space. So on the kind of the downtown density side is looking at, say, roughly 35 units per acre, kind of what's already on the northwest corner, where you would have retail on the ground level with some apartments above. And what we're thinking in general in terms of the overall site is to have a mix of occupants, predominantly maybe students, people looking for affordable housing, kind of young urban professionals, and also senior citizens. But otherwise, having that kind of strong presence, creating that facade, and then maybe in the back having the tuck under parking and other public amenities, open spaces. And in terms of activating, though, the streets is having that retail on the ground level like you already do have in downtown Blacksburg, but perhaps also introducing live-work opportunities. So that way, along some of the side streets, if offices come in, great, they can set up shop, or maybe if that need isn't there immediately, it can become basically a living unit. So there's some flexibility over time. And then as we start getting to the medium density, this might be another typology of student housing, where you have, again, a parking lot that then interfaces with common amenities, backyards, barbecues, and so forth. And I'll let you take it.
So we're really starting to look at making these streets for people, and this is really an example of a street that is shared by people and cars. So being able to create those spaces kind of like College Avenue here within the site that aren't strictly specific to vehicles and can be definitely transitional between the car and the person. So this was really looking at, this is more of a medium density housing, and it's looking at more flexible spaces and some of these structures that could be multi-age and multi-density. So this is actually looking at, it's basically a stacked townhome design, but it's looking at possibly how could we alter the standard of who's living in the housing. So how can you put, whether that be old people with young people, or whether it's families with single people living in the same building and having that mix of generations and densities. This was also in the medium density area, so both of these were looking at roughly 20 units per acre. And this was really looking at the communal spaces and private nodes. So really looking at these, creating these spaces and this network of spaces and how those relate to the building. So we were looking at a few diagrams pointing out some of these public spaces and how they can be tied together, and then how some of these spaces can be shared, and then where the private parts are within these residential units. So this is really getting more into the lower end of the density. So this would be at the farthest back point in the site. This is looking at some detached densities. And what we were really looking at for these more detached homes was really fitting the character of the surrounding neighborhoods. So we were very careful to not put very high density next to the existing single family housing. So we wanted to make sure that this new development would blend right in with the surrounding single family. And this is again looking at a detached density. So these are really creating some of those same shared spaces, so those same common greens, and also relating very closely to the single family that's right next to the extended roads.
Okay, so just to kind of give you guys an idea of scale and size, we compared our 12-acre site to places you might be familiar with. So 2 on campus, the drill field and lane, and then 2 you may or may not be familiar with, National Mall and Canal Park. So it's kind of the idea of looking at the drill field and lane, how many people can fit in sites like that. So stuff like the big event or Relay for Life can fit a lot of people in the drill field, and then lane, like big football games. So how many people can fit in our 12-acre site? And then, sorry, can you go? No, you're fine. And then I'll just be talking about the opportunities we have with the open space. You can go. So first off, we have family and play. So kind of looking at community gardens, really integrating different generations. That's some community gardens are something that young kids, older people can really enjoy doing. Looking at things like playgrounds and the topography. How can you use the topo to enhance your playgrounds as well? And then looking at you're okay. And then looking at seasonality. This is going to be a year-round thing. You want it to be used in the winter and in the summer as well. Go ahead. So then looking at shared plaza and streets. So the first 2 that you're looking at over here are actually kind of to scale. They're about 100 feet, and we're looking at that very strong center green that was talked about in the plan. And if you look at the next few, you're kind of looking at this curbless double use, especially for retail. So not only can you use it for cars, like Lauren mentioned, but you can also use it for pedestrians. You can go ahead. And the civic green. So how can you use this big lawn space? You can use it for festivals, movies, yoga, exercise, fitness. So how can you really get different groups to gather, do different events? Go ahead. And finally, stormwater. So looking at kind of the topography and the drainage, what's getting onto the site, and using it to your advantage. And then also thinking about it in the educational aspect. How can you celebrate the ecosystems? How can you enhance your life as you're walking through our site? Okay, so I just want you guys to think about what we've kind of spoken about, what you've seen. So looking at the plan and then thinking about the president's drawings that I kind of just went over with you guys. So kind of looking at the pictures and what can go in the civic green, what can go in the community green, stuff about bioswales going in through that center green area right there. And then just an overview of the things that we've talked about. So community green, connected place, public spaces, mixed housing. And then to end it off, what kind of place do you want Blacksburg to be? And I guess that'll lead to Q&A.
So I think we're doing QA, right? And then we'll switch to the next group. So we have 10 or so, 15 minutes for questions, and we can jump back to slides, and I'll pass the mic around if people have questions about this idea. Yeah. Go for it.
Thanks. My name's Bob Massengale. I'm a site designer for Virginia Tech. And I live in the 16 Squares downtown. So I had a question just generally about sort of the specific sense of place that you all might have, and I understand that you all had about a day, was that right? But for students who've lived here and maybe have been through it before, what is that sort of uniqueness for this area that you were able to kind of latch onto if you had the time? And could you talk about it?
Sure. Does anybody want to bite on that? No?
I'm not sure I understand the question, sorry.
Just so you're wondering, just the question in terms of what kind of character are we trying to convey here?
Well, I think what's the character that exists there that,
yeah.
Particularly shown out that made that place, more unique?
I think one of the main things that we hit on earlier, and it really started from this conversation of kind of looking actually at open space in the area and realizing that there's not really a lot of sort of community open space for the residential side of the community. Like there's lots of open space on campus, but as far as having places that are more community oriented and are open to the community, there's not that many in this particular area of town. So a lot of this conversation started around, okay, how do we make kind of a crossroads point where people from the community feel like they have their center of campus, so to speak. The drill field is such a central element to Virginia Tech. Where is that sort of similar kind of weight of the community landing? And so that was kind of the impetus that led to this. And as we looked at like the 16 square area, realizing that chances are as the university grows and as the community grows, that's going to be a part of town that'll grow and change too. So how do we maybe set the stage in this design with, say, the civic space that opens up onto Clay Street to eventually become kind of a center point for the community as the area around it continues to grow. So I don't know if anybody else from the team has a sense, but. Oh, yeah, go for it.
I think another kind of main principle that we were going off of in creating the character of this site was that as Blacksburg grows, we want it to be able to be a more integrated community between the town and the university. And so we kind of wanted the character of this place to be that meeting point at which we kind of start to blur the lines more between what is Virginia Tech and what is Blacksburg, and kind of bringing it out as a like mixed use family and student community. So kind of giving it less of a distinct identifier as most areas of town seem to have right now.
Yeah. Okay, over here. There you go.
Hi. I have a question. I thought it was really interesting, your notion about the middle and the drawings that you showed us at the outset that really showed the sort of the geography of this site relative to the town. I'm curious about your proposal and your concept of this place as a moment along Main Street, because Main Street is currently probably the one thread that actually, if not binds, at least it makes its way through these various regions or districts in Blacksburg. So could you talk a little bit about your proposal as it relates to the sequence of place, and it comes back to that sort of question, along Main Street?
Anybody want to bite on that one? Yeah. Fred?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is when we were brainstorming yesterday and thinking about what happens along that frontage along Main Street, we were trying to think of how do you, preserve the small character of the downtown in terms of small retail, but also was to recognize this is in potentially the end or the beginning of the downtown. So how do you also activate that? And we were trying to think, what can we add to really draw people? And what we thought was perhaps a good way of doing it is open space, to provide that big public community space that can draw people from the neighborhoods as well as the downtown to have the festivals, the farmers markets and such, to really kind of look at a new way of creating that anchor instead of, say, cinemas, big box retail, things like that, that then also can then be a catalyst in its surroundings to activate the sides of that civic green. So that's one way we're thinking about how to deal with Main Street, but at the same time to recognize you do have a very low density on the other side, so how do we play off of that in terms of the types of uses that might be there? So kind of being sensitive to that smaller scale.
There you go.
Hi. I was curious, in that same vein as maybe your answer, I'm not sure. The civic green, or the major portion of the crossing of the open space, I guess, how did it come to be there? Why is that spot, if you're talking about connecting into the community, why has that spot been, it seems to be a primary spot for you all?
So, I mean, we had quite a few conversations about whether it's, here or lands here, or how wide this sort of opening is and how that connects. I don't know. It's a good answer, right? Yeah, take it away.
I mean, I think it definitely was a struggle, because on one hand, how do you create that public space, but at the same time preserve that character of walking down Main Street again? So it was creating something that had that linkage to the library down Miller Street, but at the same time is open and permeable to the surrounding streets. So that we were tentatively thinking what would happen if there was a building here and becomes enclosed, but then it becomes too private, or it may not read too public. So allowing for that very strong access towards the maybe more higher density, or the kind of the more part of the downtown. But it was definitely a struggle. The other thing too was looking at the topography, and right now where there's that drop potentially underneath the Civic Green, putting parking so you can hide a lot of that. So there was kind of a combination of things of why it was there. And part of it too is just thinking about where we could have that larger space where it was kind of already graded somewhat flat against Clay Street.
Like any good academic exercise, you're trying to do a lot. There's a lot of stuff going on here. What's most important here, though? There's housing, there's open space, there's connectivity. I think the interest in doing all these things might dilute the overall strength of any one single idea. So I'm asking, what is most important here? What is the critical dilemma that must be overcome for the project to be successful? I think Ben's comment about the Civic Green reflects a trying to do a lot of things set of objectives.
When we first started looking at this site and realizing the size of it and how to break the site down and extending that grid, it lends itself to a framework that can then be worked within. So if you're approaching developers, or what is the city going to take on to support that framework? How does it start to scale itself in terms of phasing? And so that's really where we ended up using the framework to start to divide these spaces out, so that you could approach it from a number of different scenarios based on where a developer may be coming from, or the forces of a market at a certain time. So I think that framework was the initial piece that would be most important as a catalyst for how you would start to phase this or develop the site.
But is the housing important? Is the detail important? Or is a transformative and usable Civic Green sized appropriately to reflect a certain set of programmatic interests more important? The Civic Green, of course, would need a strong development interface with contributing uses that activate it. It's not there yet.
Right.
I know this is not a design review, so I'm sorry.
It's fine. Yeah, and I think just to build off of what Britton was saying, I think the something that our team sort of always liked was this notion of kind of starting to one way or another reestablish this parcel and this property as a part of that urban grid. So pulling these major streets back through and opening those up to actually get connectivity and flow between this neighborhood and going into downtown without having everything having to channel and funnel down Main Street. And so kind of going in this way, being able to cut the site up that way. And then the other piece was this notion of this sort of green spine that comes through that connects that community and is a point where, this is pretty wide. This is like 120, 140 feet wide swath here. So having something that's really sort of a signature point that pulls you into this, that then can connect the whole way through in the community, and depending if you're a resident living in here, or you live in a neighboring area, or that you can use that sort of spine as a way of connecting to different civic amenities that would be sitting through here. And then I think on the residential side, the sense is that with the university growing and the city growing, if there's 5,000 new students coming in, not only just where are they going to live, but where are all the other people that are going to live. We heard a lot about affordability issues in the city, so trying to think about how can we get a kind of a flexible arrangement of housing in here so that we can build in affordable housing, that we can build in multi-generational housing, so that people that are retired that have a house that want to downsize and they're done with their yard, they have a place that they can move that's close into downtown that they can walk to, and their house is now open for somebody that wants a single-family house to move into. So those are kind of the two, the open space piece and how we really provide something for the community, and then merge that that kind of multifaceted residential piece into it was really what we were kind of grappling with.
I think also there was a point in us putting it all together and kind of trying to say that it doesn't need to all be separated the way that it currently feels in Blacksburg, that there are residential areas. The parks don't seem to be very attached to the city and to the retail. And so part of our argument was that it could all go together and it could all be equally valuable.
All right, we'll go down. We have time for one more question, maybe? Two? Okay, we'll do two.
One observation I have in your presentation is there's two best friends to landscape architects. One is structured parking, and the other is mass transit, in this case, bus service. I didn't see either of them really addressed. Parking gets mentioned in quick comments, but not in terms of a formal presentation. And what concerns me is your amount of green space will get immediately traded off to surface parking if structured parking isn't in place. And a lot of your secondary green space will definitely get lost, because you could be talking about 1,000 plus automobiles that have to be stored on this site, as well as multiple buses coming through during the day.
Yeah, we didn't touch on the parking piece, so I'll mention that really quickly. This road that comes in, this would be an in and out for an underground parking structure that would be built down below that green. I mean, I think there's about 400 or almost 500 housing units in here, so you would definitely need parking for that. So looking at building that underneath the green, there's right along Clay Street, this is about a 15-foot sort of bluff, kind of gently rising up there. So being able to peel that back slightly, but then use that elevation change to actually tuck in some parking that you could then use a civic space on top of it. That's kind of where we were going with that. But, all right, there's a question back here. I'll pass that back.
I'm Donna Dene, a faculty in the school, but I also live within 300 feet of this site, long-term resident. So I think this question down here is one I want to follow up on and ask, because in some ways, the way we look at this thing, are there indicators to us as a community of what to take very seriously? And I frame that question in the sense that we all take on assumptions and we have no idea what those assumptions are that we're taking on. And we live in a real world, but one thing the real world holds is things we could never believe would have ever happened, like the High Line, or to keep the same locale, Central Park. In our community, and I don't know if you've crossed paths with that statement, this was a former school site, so it is somewhat still in the hearts of the community. It's a huge acreage, as you've shown. I think my question, to get back to, you've said it in the last answer about the open space, what should we really work towards as a community that we may be overlooking, that we all assume that it cannot be 100% park, civic park? Central Park certainly demonstrates that that can happen, that the surrounding area can take on the development. So are there indicators in this of something to let go of or to look for other ways to leverage it?
Good question. Yet,
I would just say, if you go to our last slide, and what was also our beginning slide, so there, what kind of place do you want Blacksburg to be? We came here and we started to generate some ideas over the past 24 hours or so. And so really is to get the community and everyone thinking about, what do we want Blacksburg to be? And so as a piece of engagement, how do you continue to be engaged in your community and with the city, with the college, with developers, to be able to frame that? We aren't here to provide necessarily all the answers for that, but as a springboard to start to get everyone thinking, what are the possibilities? What do we really want this place to be? So, you know, I hope that this can be an energizing moment to get more people interested in that and to be a voice for what it should be, what it should go back to.
Starting site 2, what I'll do is just sort of introduce it real quick, and we may skip this analysis proportion in the front because I feel like a lot of that was addressed for the last group. So we have affectionately titled our project The Cradle, and that has a lot to do with the topography and the landform that we found during our site visit. So we felt that we were here to provide a residential community that, you know, integrates multi-generational interests and this really special ecology that's like found on the site that you know, everyone knows about Stadium Woods, or maybe they don't, but it's a really fantastic old growth stand that's sandwiched right between campus and this historic part of the community. So you see the Stadium Woods, bordered at the bottom by some campus facilities. And then so we have probably the larger challenge for us was that how do we address designing for a place that already has a lot of structure and a lot of buildings, because you know these are people's homes right now. I mean, there's lots of invested interest here. So how can we be sensitive to the ecology of the place and everyone's interest in sort of growing Blacksburg as a community? So the idea of the cradle really comes from doing a more specific analysis of the site. All of the water generally flows through the center of the site and through Stadium Woods. So it kind of creates a bowl. So everything is based around this concept that we're trying to deal with stormwater and create a fantastic space. Next slide. Let's just skip this. Right, we were looking a lot at the Blacksburg comprehensive plan and how we have a couple of really great parks, but they're not really very close to where the people are. So we're trying to, you know, like the middle site, we're also trying to respond to that and provide a place for people to get together, have a great time, but more than just 8 weekends out of the year. Go ahead and skip that. Let's go. Don't even talk about that either. All right.
All right. Could you go back to goal 1? I don't know what happened. Oh, you're the best. Okay. Like we've already talked about here, we had a very spectacular challenge of working within an existing framework of a site and trying to re-envision what that could become. And we thought it was worth taking the time to set some goals as we approach this site. Our first goal is to reinforce and create connectivity. We're speaking both ecologically and socially when we say that. Could you go to the next slide? Sorry. And we wanted to look at the objectives of accomplishing those goals. And for reinforcing and creating connectivity, we really wanted to reintroduce forest acreage to our site. We thought of Stadium Woods as a spectacular resource right next door, and that the extension of that resource into this neighborhood would be a very valuable asset and something to use. Goal 2, provide multi-generational housing. We spoke about this in the previous group. There's somewhat of a housing crisis in Blacksburg. How do you house people appropriately, and what does that look like? Our objectives for this goal were to preserve existing urban character, so respecting the neighborhoods we border, but also recognizing the fact that we also are very close to the stadium and understanding that we have an opportunity to introduce higher density because of that relationship as well. We can go forward. And goal 3, increase community green space, another similarity that we had with the previous site. Our objectives for that goal were to repurpose existing unprogrammed lots and vacant spaces for green space, and make sure that those green spaces are flexible in nature, and reinforce the green edges of our site. We're spectacularly framed by 2 incredible resources, Stadium Woods, which we already spoke about, and the Huckleberry Trail. And so how do we capitalize on those existing edge conditions and bring it into the fabric of our site?
Thank you. So I'm going to quickly talk about the current identity of the site and then go into our design approach for the site. So currently, when I entered the site for the site visit, I felt like I entered a shift, like a different world. You're kind of in this cradle, as we're calling it, surrounded by green space and woodland of the Huckleberry Trail and the Stadium Woods. But there's also just these large open plots with these very small houses in them that gives them a weird kind of identity, but it also creates a space that I think the students like because it's kind of on this fringe or in this cradle, kind of away from the other identity of the campus. And then how do we address that? So here is just a quick overlay over the current land use. To the north is the Old Town residential. We have the low density residential coming in from the east, and then the multi-unit residential in the core of the site, and then a planned residential to the south. And we're saying we want to bring that identity of the woodland and the Huckleberry Trail into the site, bleed it in, make it more dense as you go further south, and kind of preserve the Old Town residential identity and don't displace anyone in that neighborhood. Next slide. So this is a current infrastructure and green space slide. So again, you have Stadium Woods, Huckleberry Trail. This is the current lot layout. We've marked out cul-de-sacs, areas of dead ends. It's kind of really disorganized on the site right now, and also just large parking lots that are usually half empty, half full, sometimes always full. And then also vacant lots, houses that are for sale and that are just currently vacant that we can use. So using this map, we've created this kind of overlay of green spaces, of those parking lots, those cul-de-sacs, those vacant lots that can be like immediate green spaces for this community. And then kind of connecting the spine of Center Street. There's currently a dead end here, and just creating this strong access down this linear site that has a circuit back up to the downtown area, and then taking those secondary, tertiary roads and turning them into green alleys for curbless vehicular pedestrian use. And sorry, also kind of in this phase, if you go back a slide, bringing in, kind of bleeding in at the low point of the site, Stadium Woods and the Huckleberry Trail. So now the second phase, kind of transitioning from those vacant lots, then connecting those green spaces with a landscape network, turning these green streets into like actual bioswales on either side, lined with trees so that during events they can be used as event space. Totally connecting Huckleberry Trail to the Stadium Woods, and then also just creating just these larger open spaces. Next. And then what are the identities of all these open spaces going to be? So further to the north where you have the single family residential, it's more oriented towards them with play areas, flower gardens, stroll gardens, entry gardens for the site. Maybe there's a bosque at an intersection of one of these green streets that becomes just like, I don't want to say a beer garden, but a cafe spot for the community, a water collection area at the base of the low point of the site in the woodland. And then a large event hill and event lawn and ball field at the south of the site that can really address the increase in population. This is a density overlay of the site. So I don't want you to think of these as buildings. They're not buildings. These are just zones where we can build upon. So the low density kind of bleeds in from the east of the low density site. with these zones here in between these green streets and these open spaces. And then the higher density is on this main corridor and closer north to Old Town and downtown. And then this is just an overlay of all that put together. You know, these can become these larger multi-unit residential areas around these event spaces. These are, you know, lower multi-unit residential, and you could really witness the landscape processes within these residences.
So what I'd like to do is kind of quickly paint a picture of how we envision this space being, the experience of being in the space. So this sketch kind of gives an overview of kind of our smart, where we're coming into intervening with high areas of high density growth, and then these pockets of green between. So if we could advance the next slide. This is showing a section of kind of the density in relation to the topography. And it shows, if this is a section showing from the Huckleberry Trail towards Stadium Woods. And you can see the Huckleberry Trail, and we like to, and there's kind of a berm that's separating the Huckleberry Trail from the neighborhood right now. So we'd like to use that space as a connection to beyond, to recreation, to Christiansburg, and then have a kind of a low density that's up against that, since there are neighborhoods on the other side of that. And then build towards Center Street, we have our area of higher density that we envision 2 to 3 stories along here, apartments, and a green street of sorts where we're collecting stormwater and sending it towards the low point on the site. And then as we, behind this area of higher density, we have an open space, as we're calling it. This is kind of a loosely structured space where we're dealing with water when it's time, during times of rain, but during other times it can double as public space to be used by students, and by residents alike. And then eventually that fades into the Stadium Woods, which is this old growth forest. This one is showing density in relation the other way, so this is from the north to the south generally. And we'd like to preserve the character of the older neighborhoods on the north end of the site, and then generally fade to, or I guess come towards a higher density during the low point of the site, which is in the middle. And so we progress from single family to townhomes to apartments, and then back to single family housing on the fringes of the site. And this is following a green street here. So we'd like to emphasize that we're taking care of water on the streets here towards a central axis where we're dealing with the water in the middle. And this is kind of giving a picture of what our typical street condition might look like. So as you can see here, we have the sidewalks, the bioretention, vegetation, and remediation, the public right-of-way in the middle. And this would be kind of our center street here. And with the higher density kind of directly aligning that. This is kind of showing the same thing. We'd like to take a little bit away from the car. So this would be one of those green alleys per se. These would probably be more for access to parking. So they might be one way, but we're making room for the bike here, for the pedestrian, and for this water treatment space, so that we're inviting a more pedestrian use to the site. This here is showing a connection between Huckleberry Trail and the community. This is a very important asset that we have on the site, because with the Huckleberry Trail essentially ending at the entrance to the site, it provides an entrance point from the Huckleberry Trail to Blacksburg. So we'd really like to take advantage of that opportunity and connect to the neighborhood. This here is showing what that central green spine connecting the Huckleberry Trail to the Stadium Woods might look like, and taking care of water remediation and collection in that space, and taking it towards the low space in the site. And directly adjacent to this would be kind of our pockets of smart growth of higher densities, so that we can have space for this green space. And this is showing what it might look like if we wanted to. If there's one thing that's definitely maybe worth keeping on the site, that would be the church. So we'd like to emphasize that we'd like to enhance the assets that are on this site right now. And this is kind of showing what a connection to Stadium Woods might look like, because I'm sure anyone who's visited the site has noticed there is the fence that inhibits access to Stadium Woods, and that's really a strong a strong asset to the community. So we'd like to really emphasize that connection through our design intervention. This here is showing essentially that we'd like to bring the stormwater collection and treatment to the surface as a way of dealing with it before we send it off into Stadium Woods. And this here is showing if we're going to be densifying these edges along the streets here, we have to make smart and wise decisions about how we use kind of the spaces internally within the block. So reimagining them as, instead of a collection of these private spaces coming together, an overall public space that could be framed by a denser development pattern, but really kind of increasing the value of these public spaces and framing them with vegetation, water treatment, and a higher density. So in conclusion, really, we'd like our community to really, it's about connecting these two green nodes and using these current vacant spots as kind of these catalyst points for which to center our smart and dense growth. So I think at this point we'll probably open it up to questions. We'll probably have to keep it pretty brief because I think the bus is leaving pretty soon. But yeah.
Both presentations were very well done. What do you know about the environmental health of the old growth patch? What risks or threats are there to its future health, and what does your plan do to mitigate those risks? For example, is access and compaction a risk in and of itself, and how does the connectivity principle address that?
I think that's a really good point, because even right now, I think the health of that forest is in somewhat of a risk because of all the game day traffic in particular heading through there. So what we tried to do was we focused on trying to direct pedestrian connectivity to that through two specific points, so that we can keep it to kind of an existing trail pattern and really emphasize the connections to those points, so that we aren't disturbing or compacting the areas that we're trying to hopefully preserve.
I think also to go on that is, if you notice, we sort of stopped the asphalt streets midway through the site. So we're bringing in these sort of green streets. So we're actually trying to reduce compaction. We're trying to reduce the footprint of the impermeable surfaces, so we can allow that old growth to sort of creep into the neighborhood and become an essential part of it, rather than propose something that would, in fact, damage it and be more harmful.
I think taking that a step further, I think it is also an opportunity to think of the streets as almost a seed bank for rejuvenating that growth in that forest. So trying to foster the same species that we see in the forest in the streetscape, and trying to use that as a way to judge tree health and perhaps engage the student population in research on its future. We didn't put that in a slide, but.
No, you didn't. Hence the question. What did you see as the relationship between Harold Street running parallel to Huckleberry Trail? In that, you guys tried to bridge across, using Warren Street maybe as a link, but there were two parallel identities. You didn't talk about Center Street, but what about really the one that parallels Huckleberry right now? Is that a barrier? How are you thinking of that?
I think the idea for that is that street, right now when you're sort of on the street, it does truly feel like a barrier between the two spaces. What we'd sort of like to do is open up one side of that Huckleberry Trail to actually feel like it's incorporated into the neighborhood, and actually sort of bring it out into the space, so it becomes part of that community's asset and not just a method of pedestrian transportation through and past the site. So we'd like to see it interact, whether that's through the green streets to the adjacent single-family homes. We want to keep that very low density, very easygoing, very relaxed, so you're not creating a hard physical boundary, whether through vehicles or through buildings.
And we actually did at one point look at moving that parallel street of Huckleberry into the core of the site and having a core circuit. But given the linear nature of the site, it just seemed like we were taking away from all this broader moves for the green space that we could have had, having it pushed it to the edge and doing what Jeffrey said.
So I think we have time for one more question before we miss the bus. Any other questions? Okay, here's the mic.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, so please give them a big round of applause. The entire group worked so hard. It was wonderful. Great work, everyone, and thanks for everyone for coming out, and thanks for the challenging questions. So again, I wanted to take a minute and thank our two team leaders, Lisa DePlace and Paul. Come on up. We have a little something for you. There you go. Yeah. There you are.
Thank you.
And Terry, we have something for you too. So thank you very much for everyone. Thank you so much for coming out, and it was wonderful to spend time with everybody. So thank you.
Great job.
Awesome.
Great job.
Thank you. Great job. Really good.
Really fun thing, guys.
Yeah, very good.